or Wednesday evening, a little bit. Well, I don't know, afternoon, evening. It's 6:46. What is that? Is that evening, afternoon, early evening? I don't know. But anyway, it is Wednesday, week 2, Justice Admin, and hopefully by now, we're still enrolling folks too. So things are going kind of slow. I'm not doing a whole lot. We got until like this week to finish putting people in the class, and we're still putting people in every day. So I haven't thrown a whole lot at you. So if you're wondering, wow, this isn't as much as I thought it was going to be, it's going to pick up. So don't worry about that. Remember, it's a long semester, so I can sort of slow roll these first 2 weeks. Next week, we're really going to start getting into doing some more work. There'll be some more videos. I'll be posting more videos in there, and we're going to get a little deeper into the topics. Kind of what I've been giving you guys from up till this point is just feelers, stuff to get you interested, which brings me to the videos. Now, if you watch that video, I hope you didn't watch it and can't continue to watch it, because I think the one I posted is one of the loop videos where it loops and repeats over and over and over and over. If you did, we'll talk about that psychology and how you did that, only because I'm a person of authority and I said watch this video, and when it kept repeating, you didn't question it and you just watched it anyway over and over and over and over. So let's talk about the Stanford experiment video, and let's talk about the shock test video. Now, I've been reading some of the comments on the independent forum y'all can post, and I've read some of what you've put in there, and I want to make sure you guys understand that videos together and then sort of intertwine it. And if you're taking any in-depth psychology classes like that, prison management, those kind of things, the Stanford experiment with the inmates is totally separate from the test where you have the individual that's running the machine and shocking the person to answer the questions wrong. Those are two separate experiments, and they're trying to gauge two separate things. First of all, with the Stanford experiment, what the Stanford experiment is trying to do is trying to understand a thing called organizational drift. Organizational drift. And what does organizational drift mean? Well, it means where you will have people that may have a perception of how a certain job should be done, or the way a person should act in a certain position, or what their behavior should be if they're in that situation. And without being told, or without, in this case, I think you'll see in the Stanford experiment, without having been corrected, you have where everybody's drifting into these preconceived roles, and it gets really crazy really quick, to the point where even the psychologist managing the experiment drifts into the role of a warden. Now, let me set this up and explain to you what happened in the Stanford experiment. Basically, what it was is he put an advertisement out. He went to the basement of the psychology lab, and he built this little mock prison. And he put an ad out saying, we'll pay you $15 a day for 2 weeks, and all we want you to do is come in and role play and be a part of this experiment. Well, $15 a day at the point they did this experiment was a lot of money. So he got, as you can see in the video, he got quite a few of the students there at Stanford to participate. Now, everybody involved in it was a student at Stanford. They didn't have any experience in the field of law enforcement, things like that, before walking into the experiment. And all he did was he came in and said, okay, Group A, you are going to be the inmates, and we're going to have a prison situation, and I want you to manage this prison the way you see fit. Students B in Group B, you're going to be the inmates, and I want you to behave accordingly. And then he threw them into this prison situation. Of course, he gave the guards uniforms and things like that, and he put the inmates in uniforms, and they had these little mock cells, and he said, okay, now you're a prison. Well, let me give you some deeper insight and something the film doesn't go into much. And if you get a chance, there's actually a recent major movie that came out. I think you find it on Amazon and Netflix called The Stanford Experiment, and it's a full-length movie about this whole situation. What you saw was actual footage from the real experiment. So here's what happens. They threw those two guys together, and then just so happens that the primary instigator in the prison guard side was a young guy. I think he may have been 18, possibly 19 at the time, but he's, late teens. He had just watched the movie Cool Hand Luke the day before. Now, if you don't know the story of Cool Hand Luke, or you're not familiar with that movie, it's a rock'em sock'em bad Western guy. Is Cool Hand Luke, and he's this really rough and rugged, tough guy who doesn't take any crap and all that kind of stuff. And so this kid had just watched Cool Hand Luke the night before going into the experiment. So when they told him, okay, you're going to play the role of a guard, he was like, okay, well, how would a guard act? And he mimicked the way he thought Cool Hand Luke would be a prison guard, and he wound up really being the guy that the other guards revolved off of. And you can see with the inmates, what's so funny about the inmates is they're inmates, but then they pretty readily roll into this inmate behavioral pattern. And keep in mind, these are Stanford University students. Stanford is an elite university. These are really smart people. But you can see how they kind of jump right into this inmate role, this guard role, and where they're actually abusing some of the prisoners. Things get physical, and they don't stop it. And it just continues to escalate, and it continues to escalate. Meanwhile, the psychologist that's running this experiment is sitting back and watching it, and he'll bring folks in, like he brought one guard in, or one of the inmates in, and inmates had a lot of problems. He says, hey, this is an experiment. You're free to go. You don't have to stay. You can leave at any time. And the inmate was like, no, because something may happen to my friends, or they'll talk bad about me, whatever. I've got to go back. So they really drifted into this role. And as you can see in the experiment, they stepped out of this is just an experiment into this is reality. Now, it's interesting to note that the guy running it, the psychologist running the experiment, he was not immune to the organizational drift, because as he would bring these participants in and debrief them and talk to them about what's going on and make his notes, the guard started telling them, hey, look, we think, because one of the guys did leave, and the fear was that this inmate that left was going to get a bunch of other people in, and they were going to come make a run on the prison and free all the inmates. And so as the psychologist that's running it hears this, his immediate reaction was, we have to move these inmates into lockdown. They're going to come let my inmates go. And it's curious to note that he's managing it, but he wasn't immune to the drift, because he found himself drifting into the role of a warden to the point where he was saying, I've got to put these inmates in segregation and lockdown in a separate place than where I have them now, because if I don't, this outside group of students is going to come free them and get them out. Crazy, right? You would think that would never happen. There's no way it can happen. Well, yeah, you saw it. It happens. It happens regularly, and you can see it doesn't take quick. It doesn't take long for things to go south very quick. And it happened just in a matter of days. Things were going really south in this experiment. I think it was supposed to last 2 weeks. If I remember correctly, after week 1, the psychologist running it brought in his female counterpart to observe what was going on and to help him make some keynotes and things like that and figure out how to tweak it. And she looks at what's going on and she's appalled. And as I think some of you were that watched it, she's like, what in the world are you doing? You can't do this, and you're falling into the trap yourself. And the psychologist runner was like, holy crap, you're absolutely right. I've drifted into the role of a warden, and we've actually got a prison going in. We got to shut it down. So they actually shut the experiment down after a week because things just got so crazy and so out of hand. So I hope and my point in showing it is, I want you to understand, especially like when we go and manage things or you go and work into the career field, you can see what happens when you go in with preconceptions of how you're supposed to behave or how things are supposed to be done. And you can, normally you wouldn't behave a certain way, but then all of a sudden you have a badge and you have really cool sunglasses and you have a baton and you're over these guys who have no authority. And you can go from being a really smart Stanford University student to, in a matter of 2 or 3 days, being these outrageous guards abusing other students because they're inmates, and you drift into that role. And the same way, you say, how can these people be victimized that way? How can they just fall into the role of an inmate, not help their fellow inmate, stop eating? How can they have all these issues? How can they let themselves, how would they just let somebody force them to crawl across the floor? Well, you drift into that role. Okay, you sort of follow in, and if you don't have somebody objective that's watching it, sort of like the female counterpart played at the end of the scenario where she comes in and says, whoa, things are way out of control, and stops it. If you don't have somebody being objective and daily watching what goes on in this type of situation, it's real easy to drift what you're doing and drift your organization into something that, rationally or normally you would never conceive of it doing, but it's easy to let it go that way. Now, let's talk about experiment number 2. 2 separate experiments, but they're showed kind of clipped into one another because they're looking at behaviors and why people do these certain things. So let's talk about the experiment where you have the guy in the lab coat, and he's coming in, and they have they have just the guy off the street, and they're telling the guy off the street, okay, we have to run this experiment, and we need you to do it. And what we're going to do is you're going to ask this person questions, and if they get a question wrong, you have to shock them, and we have to raise the shock level up each time they get one wrong. And you saw they took it even. Nobody died in this experiment, by the way. It's fake. The only person who didn't know what was going on was the guy controlling the switch to shock the person answering the questions. The person answering the question was an actor. He was faking. The guy in the lab coat, of course, is an actor. The idea behind this experiment was to see if you tell someone to commit an act, how far will they commit that act if there's a person of authority telling them to do it? So in this experiment, they brought a guy in, they sat him down, they brought several guys in, sat him down on a control board and said, okay, you're going to ask this guy a question. Every time he misses it wrong, you're going to give him an electric shock. And each time you shock him, you have to move to the next button. So the level of shock goes up to a fatal level if the guy's getting it wrong. So potentially you're going to kill this person for answering questions wrongly. And even to the point where the guy's participating, like, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to kill this guy. I'm not going to keep going. And the guy in lab coat says, I don't have to worry anything to worry about. I'll take the blame. You're not going to have any blame in it. Keep doing it. And so the guy does it to the point where he thinks he's killed the person. He's saying, I think this guy's dead. Will you go check on him? Well, of course he wasn't dead. There's no electrical shock going on. The point of this experiment was to say that a rational, logical, educated person may go beyond a point that they normally would not go to if they're told to commit an act by a person of authority. Meaning, and it was proven in this instance, where you have a rational person may go to, in this case, shocking someone to death because they missed a question, only because a person in authority was telling them they had to do it. They had to continue with the experiment. Now, where did the idea for this experiment come into? I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with the Nuremberg trials. It's called the Nuremberg trials. And Nuremberg is a place in Germany, and the Nuremberg trials were the trials of the Nazi war criminals at the end of World War II. And when they went to try a lot of these Nazi war criminals, their defense was, yeah, I may have participated in this behavior, I may have been part of the death camps, that kind of stuff, but I was only doing what I was told to do. So I can't be to blame because I was only doing what my leadership told me to do. So they came up with a lot of these studies, just like this one with the shock test, to see if a rational person would go to the extent of actually killing someone just because a person in authority told them to. And as you saw in the experiment, yes, they will. They'll go that far. And I hope as you watch both of these scenarios, as you watch what happened with the Stanford prison experiment and you watch what happened with the shock test, is that it really starts to make you think, and I know a couple of y'all say, how will people could behave this way? Well, and why you may have asked yourself, hopefully, some of you people already in the law enforcement field, I hope you said, what does this have to do with justice administration? Well, I wanted to bring something really different and really shocking in at the very first because I want to kickstart your brains into thinking of what can happen and how leadership plays a extremely significant role in what happens in our work environment and in our organization. Okay? And just like with the prison experiment, if we're not telling people how to behave correctly, we're not giving them exact guidelines, and then we're not regularly checking to ensure that they're following proper guidelines, you can see it only takes a day or two to drift into madness, right? And then if we're not protecting our inmates, we're not treating them well, if we're not checking with them regularly, and again, giving them guidelines on behavior and how they're going to act and what they're going to do, and if we're not checking on that regularly, then we can see they can drift very far as well. And as a leader, if you're going to go in and manage an organization, you need to be keenly aware that, everything you think up and everything you decide to do is not going to be the right thing to do. And you have to keenly understand, be very, very vigilant and very, very aware of the fact that most people will never tell you you're wrong and never doubt what you say because you're a person of authority. And when a person of authority tells people what to do, most of the time they do it. Okay? So we need to be aware of these behaviors and the fact that these behaviors go on so that we can properly manage our organization when we get into not only roles of leadership, but when we get in roles. Say next week you go and apply and you get hired as a jailer. Well, it's very important you don't go in with a preconceived notion that a jailer's all in charge and an inmate has to do everything a jailer has to do. Hopefully, you're going to have SOPs. You're going to go through some kind of training that teaches you. If you go to state, you got to go through the school to be a corrections officer. If you get hired as sheriff's department, hopefully they're going to give you training, and there'll be veterans there that'll teach you how to act. But what I want you to understand, walk away from this more than anything else is, whether you're a leader, a shift sergeant, a sheriff, a chief of police, a jail night watch guy, whatever, first of all, if you're in a situation and you're Joe Blow, first day on the job, and you see something going on that you think is wrong and you question, never be afraid to bring it up. Because as you see, an organization may fall into drift and nobody ever questions what's going on. Something incorrect may never go being corrected. And secondly, if you're the person in authority, don't be afraid to listen to someone, or don't be offended and not listen to someone who's coming and saying, hey, this behavior is going on and I don't think it's right. Okay? So, I want you to look up organizational drift, Google it, do some more digging into it, get a good understanding of what it is. Go back and watch this video one more time and really get a good understanding and think, okay, at what point maybe could somebody have stepped in and stopped this? Where did it, how does it go? And I want you to watch the Stanford experiment again and notice that, especially with the guards, they start off kind of light, and then they do something, and the inmates respond. The inmates respond and do it. Nobody comes in and says, don't do that again. So they continue to escalate. It continues to move up the chain. The behavior continues to get worse and worse and worse because nobody's questioning it. Nobody's coming in and stopping it. Nobody's changing it. So they continue to drift further and further away from what we would consider rational behavior. Okay? So go back in, and now that I've explained it a little bit and I've given you some things to think about, go back into this open forum and maybe let's talk about, okay, if I was in this situation, what would I have done different, knowing what I know now? And keep in mind, all these guys went in knowing it was an experiment. It wasn't reality. You can see how the experiment turned into reality really quick. So maybe if you guys could jump in the forum now and talk amongst yourselves and say, okay, if Mr. G said we're going to redo this experiment, we're going to do it at South Georgia Tech, how do we make sure it's done correctly? What would we do to make sure something like the Stanford experiment would really happen? And then on the shock test experiment, I want you to really think about it, and I want you guys to talk about, is that realistic? Is it realistic now? Keep in mind, this was back, this happened back in the late 60s, early 70s, into that time frame. So, we're looking at 2016. Do you think people in the shock test would behave just the same today? Could you pull somebody off the street and say, we're going to do this experiment, and you don't have any liability at all, you just need to continue with the experiment until we tell you to stop? Do you think somebody would carry it so far to the point that somebody eventually dies because of their actions? Okay, even if they're questioning, do you think a rational person? So get back in there now that I've talked about it, and now that I've given you a little bit better optic about what's going on and why I wanted you to watch it and talk about it. Google organizational drift and hop into the forum and tell me what you think about organizational drift. If you're already in law enforcement, or by chance if you're a law enforcement administrator, jump into here and kind of help out these younger guys and say and give some ideas of how you may have seen this happen in your organization, or ways you think your organization may have set in place to prevent it from happening. Okay? Again, if you have any questions, let me know. I may post some other stuff because I want to get into a little bit more, but I'm not pushing real hard this week because I've still got folks enrolling. Next week's when we're really going to hit into the meat and bones. I'm probably going to post some, I know a lot, I don't know if all of you have books. I think some of my guys didn't get books yet. And if you don't have one, that's fine. I'm going to post everything. If you do have one, Figure 1.1, it says the scope and study of justice administration. It sort of goes through how the justice system works, and I want to talk about that for just a bit and give you an understanding of how justice administration works and where it comes from. Okay. Now you know, of course, there's sheriffs, and there's chiefs of police, and there's judges, and there's district attorneys, and we have these roles, these various roles in our law enforcement community. You think, well, how do they get their job? How they appoint them? Okay, and then you think about what all's going on in just our communities alone. So you look at maybe let's just say Sumter County and Crisp County. Okay, now first of all, your district court judges, how are they put in the office? I see hands going up. I hear some people trying to answer. How are your district court judges put in the office? They're elected. They run for office. They get elected, they go into office. Your district attorneys, how do they get put in office? They're elected. They run for office, and they get put in office. They're elected. Your sheriffs, how do your sheriffs get in office? They're elected. They run for office. They get elected. They get put in office. How your chiefs of police get put in office? They're appointed, meaning the mayor and the council get together and they say, okay, we need to hire a chief. And they look over the candidates, and a chief is an appointed public official, which means they have no job guarantee. Their job stands as long as a majority of the mayor and city council say they like them. As soon as a majority of the mayor and city council say we do not want you anymore, you're unemployed. You have no job status. So, why does that matter? Well, it's not that it has a big impact, but you have to think about something. The leadership of your legal system are politicians. Now that's good and bad. I'm not necessarily saying it's a good thing. I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. It's a good thing in the fact that if you get somebody in office that doesn't do a good job, they can be removed by the next election. Or as far as a chief of police goes, they can get moved by the next time mayor and council decide to meet and raise their hands and say, we don't want you anymore. But you have to keep in mind that your judicial leadership, whether it be the law enforcers or it be the judgeships and district attorneys, they are politicians. And the reason that can matter is, you hear people say, if I was sheriff, I would do things differently. If I was the chief, I would do things differently. Lolly. Well, you have to keep in mind when you get in there, if you want to keep your job, you not only have to do things right, but you have to keep people happy. You have to do the things that the people who put you in office want you to do to an extent that they continue to agree to put you in office. If you're a sheriff, you have to keep your constituency happy. And what does the constituency mean? Well, if you're the sheriff of Sumter County or you're the sheriff of Crisp County, your constituency are the voters of Sumter and Crisp County. You have to keep the voters happy, or next time they're going to vote you out. Well, does that mean you can always do exactly what you want to do? Well, hopefully you're always going to do the right thing, but it means that you can't necessarily do exactly what you want to do, because what you may want to do may not be what your constituency wants done, and it could cost you your job. Same way with the chief of police. You can go in there and try to run an agency the best you want to run it, but if the mayor and council want you to do something and you refuse to do it, all they have to do is raise their hand and say, we don't want you anymore, and they'll get somebody who wants to do things the way they want to do it. So keep that in mind when you talk about justice administration. It's not always as, superhero kind of moral virtue. I'm always going to do the right thing, and there's no flex, and I'm always going to be on the straight and narrow, and nothing's going to make me change my mind, and I'm the big boss, and I'm the sheriff, or I'm the chief, and I can do things exactly the way I want. It doesn't work that way. That's not the way the system's set up. So they have to do what is right and what they feel is best, to the point that they're allowed to by the restrictions of their job. Okay, I hope that's making sense to you. And then keep in mind, when you're running a department, the same thing goes with your employees. I had to fire my best friend one time because he wasn't doing what he was supposed to do, and he thought since I was his boss, and we'd actually worked together in the agency, and then I eventually moved up in rank and became chief, and had to fire him because he wasn't doing what was good for me to keep my job. So, you have to do things right. You may have somebody you really want to hire, but it's not who the mayor and the council want in a job. And you know what? You may have to give on that so that they will agree to buy you an extra patrol car the next year. So there's a lot of things that go on. It's a politics job. It's not straight and narrow. There's a lot of finesse involved. You have to be really good at. You guys probably aren't going to know what this is, but you used to see on TV plate spinners. There was these guys that would have plates set up on different little poles, and they would go try to keep all the plates spinning, and they were called plate spinners. Well, if you're going to be a sheriff or you're going to be a chief of police, you better be a really good plate spinner, because you got to learn how to keep everybody happy and spin all of your plates, because once your plate starts crashing, you're going to be, saying welcome to Walmart or whatever. I'm teaching at South Georgia Tech. No, I'm joking. I left in good standing. I resigned as chief of police and went to work for the government. So just keep that in mind, that, when it comes to being a leader, there's some politics, there's some outside things. There's a lot of influence that you may not understand right now. Just getting into it, and if you're already there, if you're already in one of those slots, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But as you move into your career, understand that things aren't as cut and dry. And next time you go to say, hey, if I was chief, I would do this. I hear that a lot from lower level guys. Like, I'll have people, even when I was like a chief, and folks from the sheriff's department, if I was sheriff, I would do this. Well, no, you don't know that because you're not in that position yet. So wait till you get in that position before you start running your mouth about what you would or would not do, because you don't know what's being told them behind closed doors. Okay? But we'll get into it, and we'll get into how the judicial system works as well. We'll get into plea agreements and how all that kind of stuff does, and how you manage those situations. We'll get into some counterdependency between chiefs and sheriff's offices, and all this kind of really good stuff more starting next week. So right now, really focus on the Stanford experiment, focus on what's going on there. And now that most of you have watched it, I hope, I want you to go in that open forum and really talk about what you saw. Tell me whether you think it was something you could fall into. Could you drift into those roles and see yourselves doing those things? And if you're in a leadership role, tell me your optic. What do you think about organizational drift? And have you been involved in it before? Have you tried to stop it before? Do you have things set up in your organization that will prevent it? So let's get in there, really hit that open forum, and start talking amongst yourselves. And I'm going to get in there probably a little bit later this week and start typing some comments on stuff I see as well, just to generate stuff. And let's get going from there. If you have any questions, let me know. Don't panic. I hope everything's going well. I hope everybody knows how to use the system now. I hope that when you're getting into Blackboard, you're clicking on lessons and using those lesson folders to guide what you're doing for the week. I hope everybody knows how to post on the discussion board. I hope everybody knows where to look for stuff coming up. And then check your announcements, check your email, because that's how I send everything out, let you know I've just posted something, okay? Have any questions, hit me up. start talking in this open forum too about, hey, this is what I've done so far. Am I doing right? Because I know I've had students before who logged in like week 2 and thought that all that they had to do for the semester, what was in the folder for up to week 2. So at the end of the semester, when they got an F, they were like, I did all my work. I said, no, you did up to week 2. So kind of hop in the open forum and say, hey, this is what I think we're supposed to have done. Am I right? Am I tracking? If you don't want to ask me. And y'all start working with one another, and then get ready, because next week I'm going to start speeding things up, and we're going to get into the rest of this semester. It's not going to be really fast this semester because, this could really be like a mini semester course, and we got to make it run for 16 weeks. So it's not going to be really fast paced. Okay, I'm not going to throw tons and tons of stuff on you, but I am going to do a lot of things. I'm going to start moving into doing some interaction and things y'all going to have to work with together. I'm going to give you some scenarios. I'm probably in this course, one of the things I like doing is I like for you to structure. Tell me how would you structure a jail, manage a jail? How would you structure a police department? If you were running a DNR office, how would you do that? You're running a probation office, how would you do that? I'm going to start running into, and so some of your assignments, like maybe your midterm is going to be a practical one. You tell me, you do diagrams, stuff like this. Tell me how. Okay, if this was your department, how would you manage it? How would you staff it? What type of budget would you need? Those kind of things. Okay, so start thinking those ways. Ask me if there's certain things you would like to see in this course, because I have flexibility with it. So if there's something you would really like to kind of delve into one week in this course, hit me up, throw it in an open forum, or shoot me an email and say, hey, Mr. G, I would like for us to spend a little bit of time talking on this topic. And this is one of those courses where I can add some of the stuff that you're interested in, because the length of this semester and the amount of material we have to go over. Okay? So let me know if you need anything. I appreciate it, and good luck.